Hello everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion as part of the RICS Tech Partner Programme. My name is Andrew Knight and I've been with RICS for over 13 years now. I currently work in our thought leadership and analytics part of the organisation, and my role is to look at the effect of AI, data and tech right across the built and natural environment. And with over 110,000 members working worldwide right across that property life cycle through land use, planning and development, construction, valuation, brokerage, property management, building surveying, etc. It's a very broad canvas upon which data and tech's having a very profound effect. And indeed, our members work across all the major asset types as well, whether that's land itself, residential, commercial, alternative assets, and indeed infrastructure. And I've really got a very powerful panel today here to discuss the topic of AI and how it's going to shape data analytics within real estate. And that's obviously, once again, a fairly broad topic, but really one that's very, very apposite at the moment, given the interest, if I can use that phrase, that's been driven in terms of AI with the recent wave of generative AI. But obviously, we're very aware of the other forms of AI that have already been around as well. So what I'll do first, if I may, is I'll go around the table, get all the panel members to introduce themselves and their firms and what they do. So perhaps I could start with you, Alberto.
Hi, yes, thank you very much, Andrew. So I'm Alberto Sarugia. I'm based in Tokyo in Japan, and I'm the founder and CEO of Lombard Standard, which is an AI-powered market network for commercial real estate. So in short, what we do is we profile commercial real estate companies using artificial intelligence. So we create a full profile, including investment criteria, including location, of course, summarization and other features. And then basically we have a database of companies. Right now is about 5,000 companies globally. And basically the users can inquire the database and get a matching score based on a specific property. So let's say you want to buy or sell a hotel in Osaka, and basically it's a prompt that you can input in our database, and the AI engine, which is a vector database, will render a list of matching companies either on the buy side or sell side that are active into the hotel Osaka kind of space. Of course, there is more than that, but in short, that's our main business. It's a predictive AI for matching commercial real estate companies, basically.
Thanks, Alberto. And moving to you, Matt, a similar kind of thumbnail sketch of yourself and Income Analytics.
Yeah, Matt Richardson, CEO and co-founder of Income Analytics, which was set up in 2020. Prior to that, 35 years working commercial real estate investment market, both on the sell side and on the buy side. And then most recently is the Director of Investment Research at Fidelity. Income Analytics was set up in 2020 to provide a very specific service in an area of the commercial real estate that's largely overlooked, and that's the processing and understanding of the risks around tenants and corporate failures, and understanding how secure cash flows are, because it impacts everyone from valuers through owners, lenders, and obviously tenants themselves. And what we wanted to do was bring a lot more transparency and standardization to the market, because both of those things increase liquidity. Quite literally 10 years ago, we couldn't have done this simply because of the changes in technology that have allowed us to process data at scale and look at basically using algorithm and using detailed analytics to look for correlations in data, which we subsequently, previously couldn't see. So what Income Analytics is trying to do is help people price risk more effectively, whether that's as lenders, investors, or participants in the market. But more importantly, that in itself begets a whole new industry, which is understanding how property fits into the wider financial markets firmament. And the last piece of that jigsaw essentially is trying to bring the standards of underwriting, risk management, and risk understanding from the equity and debt markets across into property, so that real estate can compete with other asset classes for capital on global markets.
No, interesting, thank you. And last but not least, Chlump.
I'm Chlump, and I'm the founder and CEO of Placemake.io. I'm actually a mathematician by training and sensibility, and approach real estate from the outside with the perspective and methods of a mathematician. As an undergraduate at Northwestern, I studied economics, specializing in game theory and auction theory, and developed models that turns out can be used to design optimal real estate auctions, which are often suboptimal. I founded an economic consulting firm and served as a strategic advisor to Abbott Labs, developing novel models to pick winning drug markets. For my master's at NYU, I studied philosophy, specializing in mathematical logic and welfare economics, and pioneered novel models in resource allocation and invented a new mathematical framework to model multi-agent reasoning. The goal of my PhD in mathematics at LSE was to revolutionize the field of game theory and take down John Nash and all these other mathematicians. I pioneered a novel solution concept for non-cooperative games that generalizes and extends prevailing theory while resolving a number of long-standing paradoxes. My supervisor loved it. My examiners thanked me for the experience, told me to publish in the top journals, and asked what I was going to teach. I said, maybe later. I'm building an AI company right now. While doing my PhD, I was working on AI and machine learning for fun and realized that AI could transform real estate, which had made little use of algorithms and non-traditional data. Similar to a quant hedge fund, I built quant strategies, but for real estate by aggregating vast amounts of data, especially non-traditional data, and designing algorithms to spot deal opportunities, and Placemake.io was born. Our team includes 10Xers with PhDs from leading institutions such as MIT and Brunel, patents, and expertise in algo trading and AI systems at hedge funds, JP Morgan, Credit Suisse, ING, Samsung, and similar organizations. Our backers include Tech VC/Family Office of the Mittal family, the largest real estate tech VC in Europe, a member of the family behind the Santander Banking Group, the former CEO of BNP Paribas Real Estate UK, former Uber executives, and other industry executives. Placemake.io is an AI provider of critical location and asset data and AI analytics and technologies for the real estate community and beyond. And we empower smarter real estate investment and other decisions by enabling clients to understand and analyze key drivers of performance, risk, and potential. We've been called Bloomberg or Google for real estate for our big data engine, which encompasses everything from residential and commercial real estate and demographics to macroeconomics and spending, and also the power of our models. These models are trusted by leading global institutional investors, insurers, private equity firms, and others to drive investment decision-making, capital allocation, fund strategy, transactions and deal qualification, strategic site selection, underwriting, risk management, and market analysis.
Thanks, Chlump. I'd like to go back to you, perhaps start with you, Alberto, but in many ways ask all of you a similar question, dare I say, which is a lot of what I'm finding, and I've seen a survey from another tech partner this morning around the lack of understanding of actually what AI is. I mean, I'd be interested to hear from all three of you, perhaps starting with Alberto. How would you define AI? What are the limits of AI in terms of perhaps people talking about an AI approach and really it isn't? So how would you define the boundaries of what we should really think of AI being?
That's a big question. So yeah, I think there are several ways to define AI, but for my point of view, it's basically a way to interact with data in a way that is similar to the human brain, of course, without mimic it, but understanding the patterns that are within data. That's my broader definition. There are a few things that AI can do, namely prediction, automation, and optimization. And so depending on the type of business you are in or the goal you have, these three are the three things that AI can do for business or even for individuals. In our case, we are focusing on prediction because our model is basically working. We use GPT-4 as a baseline, and on top of that, we have built our own data set and our own prompt engineering. So basically, we have a proprietary engine that is derived from GPT-4, but then use our own code, our own software to predict what are the best companies to engage in a certain particular deal type. So it's a lot of work because basically, as I'm sure everybody has the same problem, the data is unstructured most of the time. It's really, scattered here and there. There is no unique source of information. So in our case, the first thing to do is to basically take the data, raw data, and then clean it up, structure it, make it, clustering, make it consistent. And then based on that data, we run our software on top of it, and we are able to inquire this data and to extract information. So again, prediction, automation, optimization about data. And in our case, we are working on the prediction side and on the company, real estate company environment.
Thanks. And Matt, from your perspective, almost sort of spinning that question around slightly, when you're talking to clients and explaining what you do and explaining that you have AI as part of what you do, how do you explain what the AI is and what it does? How do you, dare I say, to a layperson who's interested in the value rather than the mechanics, but they still want to understand what it is that AI means in your context, for example?
Well, I mean, this comes back to, your definitions of AI. I mean, at its broadest and highest sense, essentially, we're talking about, the science of making machines that can think like humans in some respect and replace some of the processes. The way we would really, I don't necessarily major on the AI piece, because essentially, building on something Alberto was saying, one of the key things is the machine learning in terms of big data sets. I mean, even 5 years ago, the processing power simply wasn't there to do a lot of the work we do. At the core of what we're doing is looking at over 500 million companies around the world in real time, and we're looking at 20-year histories of how and when companies have failed. And the way we explain to people what we're doing is, rather than the old way of people downloading maybe a current report and looking at current information, what sort of the deep processing of data allows you to do is actually create new, unique data sets and understandings of actually what you're looking at. And quite often, as I'm sure the other guys will do, the moment you start getting into this, you start creating whole new markets and whole new understandings of how we behave. Because at the heart of all of this is a lot of the data we're looking at is itself behavioral. It's looking at what people have done, whether that's in transactions, pricing, valuations, and all kinds of things, how they're developed. And that in itself has a behavioral element in it. What the AI piece is allowing us to do is at scale create the correlations. And probably from where Alberto was on the other side of forecasting, I would say the key bit for us is correlations of data on a mass scale, because what we're trying to look at is anticipate human behaviors and economic behaviors, which do tend to work in cyclical patterns and are triggered by certain sets of events. Now, nothing is perfect, but for the first time now, what we're able to do is take vast data sets. I'm talking about billions of data points here. If you're looking at the credit histories of global companies going back over the last 20 years on a daily basis, you get an idea of the scale of data that you're dealing with. But what it allows you to do for the first time is to squeeze out the subjectivity from people and say, it's fine what you believe, but the maths is this. These are the facts. And I mean, just at a very practical level, once we started processing in the early days for getting the thing going, we started to discover all kinds of weird and wonderful patterns in things which we just didn't know were there. And they became very practical outputs for the market. What we discovered with companies, the age of a company was tremendously important. Companies under 3 years old failed 50% of the time. Companies that had gone into a voluntary rental arrangement fail 84% of the time within 3 years of doing that. You can't know that. You have structured data. You have you're applying structured models to that data, and you're processing it at scale, and you have the ability to correlate that information. And that really is kind of the value that we're putting on this. It's saying it's the ability to now understand the market that you operate in and all the various factors. And I think the really big defining point with property is almost like any other financial market, is the number of data points, because property involves everything from muddy boots on the ground, running real estate, all the way through to highly structured finance products, private equity, and derivatives. So actually the range of data sets you're dealing with within the real estate industry is vast, and the outputs for it are from the very practical facial recognition all the way through to extreme, financial underwriting, the derivatives market. So it's a fascinating world, and one absolutely built for AI.
So moving to you, I'd like to kind of tease, at the risk of getting too technical, I'd like to tease still just one more thing around this question about the kind of boundaries of what is AI and what isn't, because to some extent one can define it in this conceptual sense of a machine that effectively is mimicking human thinking. But I mean, back in the noughties, I worked for a large firm where we were doing modeling in the consumer world using data on every household in the US and the UK, both demographic and transactional data, and we used regression analysis and shade and various statistical methods, but it wasn't machine learning. I mean, in your view, at the risk of being pedantic, is it worth us thinking about AI being really primarily a machine learning world, or are those traditional statistical approaches, albeit applied to big data, still something that you would categorize as AI?
Yes, I would still categorize many of those techniques as AI. They sit within machine learning. The AI is the science and engineering of intelligent machines, the intelligence that such machines exhibit, and the simulation of human intelligence by a machine. And machine learning is a subfield of AI and is the science and engineering of training a machine to accomplish a task based on experience and data without explicit programming. And AI and machine learning, they're especially powerful for several reasons. Learning does not require explicit programming. The performance generally improves with data scale, and AI is a general purpose and widely applicable set of tools. AI is not a single technology, but a collection of different tools or classes of models. You mentioned a few already. Currently, two of the most dominant are supervised learning and generative AI. Supervised learning involves estimating an input-output mapping, essentially a function that takes in an input and outputs a label or a value. Now, the model is trained on the labeled data. In other words, it knows what the right answers are, and is then applied to new unlabeled data. For example, an automated valuation model takes in various features, for example, asset type, floor area, and so on, as inputs and outputs the asset value. Generative AI, as the name suggests, learns patterns in training data and generates novel data, for example, a text, an image, video, and so on, with similar characteristics. Actually, this type of technology has been around for a few years and was introduced in a 2017 paper by Google researchers called "Attention is All You Need." With generative AI, a prompt is fed into the AI model, which then generates new content based on the prompt. Real estate is interesting because it's especially amenable to AI for several reasons. Many of the real estate problems that we see are structured, they're well-defined, they're tractable, they're very repetitive, automatable, and quickly, efficiently, and effectively solved with AI. Unstructured and non-traditional data are more easily processed using AI, as Matt just mentioned. And AI can process far more data and identify patterns that would otherwise be inaccessible. I can go through some of the applications very quickly. For example, when it comes to investment, AI could enhance and automate investment analysis, DD, underwriting, financial modeling, comp selection, opportunity discovery. It could identify the most attractive markets with the optimal risk-return profiles, that develop novel investment strategies based on current and forecasted market conditions, generate investment decks, IAC reports, and more accurate evaluations, optimize site selection and asset positioning, continuously track prices and rents and automate real-time pricing, enhance credit decision-making and origination, and automate Monte Carlo other simulations to model risk. But there are other opportunities within other areas. So for example, if we're thinking about maybe asset management and operations, AI could enable continuous real-time data aggregation, collection, management and analysis, or enable dynamic operation, intelligent monitoring, management, and optimization of an asset. We could look also at automated performance tracking and prediction, predictive maintenance, supply chain and logistics optimization, document summarization, document generation, and so on. Within the design space and the manufacturing space, could help with generative design, quality testing, anomaly detection, yield loss minimization, automated construction and project management, identification of on-site risks, and so on. And within client and other auxiliary services, AI could help with document analysis and feature extraction, as already been mentioned, image upscaling, content generation, automated tenant referencing, and client or tenant management engagement.
Thanks. Now, we've recently just done our tech partner survey, and there still seem to be among certain parts of the market a kind of reluctance to adopting data and technology at all, let alone AI. And I'm interested to hear from all of you, perhaps going back to you, Alberto, what you still see as the challenges of getting AI more widely used across the built environment, both in terms of technical challenges, but perhaps some of the kind of human issues of behavior and change and reluctance and perhaps, dare I say, lack of awareness. I mean, what's your sense of what barriers still remain to get the benefits of AI flowing across all those different areas that Chlump and the rest of you have talked about?
Well, as you mentioned, the reluctancy is not just on AI, but even for other technologies. I mean, real estate is a 2,000 years old industry where people, buy and sell land from millennia, basically the same way. They shake hands and, So there is, in my experience, this industry is really, really, really tough in terms of technology adoption, because there is a sense that, if things has been done the same way for so long, why should I change? I mean, Excel is still the predominant technology right now. And it's really hard to have people move from Excel. It's familiar, it's kind of comforting, it's easy to understand, it's it's something that people really like, is there from 20 years. So in my experience, adoption is really a problem. There is a reluctancy, and I think, as you said, I think the main reason is that real estate is a very, very old industry, and there is a tradition of people doing the same thing over and over again successfully. So it's not like, the old way doesn't work. The old way works very well. And so people say, why should I adopt something else? So this in terms of overall technology. Then when we go to AI specifically, I think there is, in my experience with our customers, there is at personal level, there is employee level, there is adoption. Some people use it, some people is interested to know more, and they ask questions, they want to try. But in our experience, the main issue is the corporate level, where when you start to have to sell the full product to a company, maybe even large company, 100 employees or 200 employees, and when you have to scale and adopt at a company level, then there is kind of problem, because it's not clear yet what AI can actually render. I mean, of course, everybody knows it's great, but I'm not sure it's still is already sure that the results provided by artificial intelligence are correct. And the problem is that this industry cannot allow mistakes. I mean, generative AI, as we know, has a lot of hallucinations, but in a financial market, you cannot have that, because even one hallucination can screw the overall business plan or whatever. So I think there is a reluctancy also because of this.
Now, Matt, moving to you, it's interesting you mentioned that you don't necessarily have to or feel the need to talk a lot about AI when you're talking to clients and customers in terms of developing the value you have. So from that point of view, I guess perhaps AI isn't seen as an issue for your customers, but has there been a challenge for you in terms of the data you needed to develop the models, to develop your product? So, have you bumped into issues and barriers around being able to apply AI in the way you want to do it?
Yeah, and this probably links back to what Chlump was saying a little bit earlier as well. I mean, just building on that point about the adoption of AI within the real estate industry, it's it's very easy to see the applications in the basic processes. A lot of the processes are highly repetitive and can be managed away, and we can squeeze them down by simply looking at, kind of just-in-time style approach to looking at how successful processes are, looking back at them. I think, and I'm talking more about the finance part of it because that's the area I work in rather than the muddy boots and the asset management piece of this. I think there are a couple of automatic areas of, should we say, pushback. The first is property for the people who've made a lot of money out of it tends to be highly linked to the fact that they owned a lot of the proprietary data and had access to information that other people didn't have. So actually, when we look around the world at the world's wealthiest people in pretty much any country, they'll be the real estate owners. And they're not in the mood to share information, particularly because they've actually made a fortune by not sharing information. So there's a reluctance immediately on day one because the people, there's the dog in the manger syndrome slightly. What's happened with the advent of technology starting sort of 20 odd years ago is exactly what happened in the equity and debt markets. You can't unknow. Information gets out there and it begins to get into people's processes. Property, though, is, or from an investment perspective and the lending perspective, is very interestingly different to equity and debt. And it's interesting in this regard. It's still an artisan market. You will find that fund managers and investors tend to operate and they will do everything in the process themselves with the spreadsheet that Alberto referred to. If you look at how equity and debt markets work, they're far more deconstructed. So how are opportunities derived? They're derived by research teams, analytics and quants. Portfolio managers and investors then execute. In real estate, you have the reverse. You have the portfolio managers making the decision, then you have the execution, and the execution inevitably leads to you cherry picking the data that fits your case rather than looking at the case from the data. And there's a great example of this. Capital asset pricing models, the way they were deployed in the equity markets and are the primary driver now behind the ETF market and the huge shift in global markets from active investment to passive investment, is all driven by access and transparency and the ability to trade in real time on the exchanges. In other words, we can buy an index. Why? Because we can replicate an index in seconds and we can replicate the market. So far, so good. Doesn't work in property because, of course, to replicate a property index, you have to own a percentage of every property in the index at the same level as the market, and that's just wholly impossible. And this gives rise to some very weird statistical anomalies within property. So we have people saying, okay, my strategy is to buy offices in Birmingham. Now I can go and buy an office in Birmingham. It doesn't give me the Birmingham office market return. It gives me the return on an office in Birmingham, which Chlump will tell you mathematically is a whole different deal. Okay, so real estate is not about buying markets and trends. It's about individual transactions. And I would almost argue that there's no such thing as a real estate market. There are transactions that occur in a market. It's a bit like, the collider. It happens for just a second where we have a willing buyer and a seller and then we have some heat and then it goes away. What we're talking about, though, is deploying huge amounts of data into the back of this process. And the point I want to make is building and selling financial markets products is no different to building and selling cars, manufacturing cotton or anything else. It's a process. You're identifying an opportunity, you're building a product. It may not be a holdable, fungible product. It may be a conceptual product as a financial tool, but it still needs a series of processes. And I think one of the big challenges for the property market is it needs to now begin to look at how it packages itself as an investment process, and processes are driven by data. And as we're now, what the big data and AI and the machine learning is allowing us to do is to create the various component rooms within that process. And so, okay, at this point, what risk am I taking? What decisions do I need to make? How do I move on to the next? Or do I defer and go somewhere else? What additional information do I require to make this decision? But it is, I bring it back to this challenging, this deep thing. when you begin to deconstruct the data, which, as anyone will tell you, is the key in looking at information. When information is given to anybody in the world, it's always framed, right? So there's a behavioral bias in there as how somebody put that thing together on day one. What the AI piece and what the ability now to process huge amounts of data is, it allows us to deconstruct to ground zero and then build the data back up and look for the correlations. And it really challenges some of the absolute core tenets of the property industry. We talk about sectors, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
Statistically, if you look at the performance of investment assets, you're far better off looking at a whole range of 10,000 assets. One of the correlations may be sector, but we make the decision to group on day one. That's a behavioral bias that messes up the data. And AI allows us to unravel that and begin to look at what the reality of the correlations and what's actually driving the risks and performance within these things. And the one that absolutely drives me nuts, for years I've had to sit and listen to people talking about core and core plus and core blimey and risk. And I'm like, we are the only industry in the world that predefines our risk profile before we go talk to the investor. If I go to the bond market, I buy BBB bonds because I know what the risk attached to them is. It's defined by the market. Real estate is the only industry where we do that. And I think AI is going to change that, because we're going to deconstruct and we're going to have a greater understanding of the inputs of the data. And it's really, really going to challenge how we work over the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, Matt, that you bring up the blunt reality of that information asymmetry, to use the jargon that means the industry is loath to share data. And I guess moving to you, Chlump, I mean, when we talk about barriers, I guess I'm almost kind of answering the question from your perspective, because in many ways the availability of data can hinder the adoption of AI. But what you've done, correct me if I'm wrong, is very much look at other data sets, non-traditional data sets that can give us huge insight because we don't have that other piece of data. So what's your perspective on the challenges, and perhaps what you've already managed to do to overcome those challenges of getting AI to work when we don't have a lot of structured data and we don't share the data as a sector?
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's basically an example of one of the technical challenges. I can discuss some of the technical challenges, but also some of the more structural challenges. In terms of the lack of data, that is probably one of the main issues. So for example, these AI algorithms require tons of data, and real estate lacks really sufficient data. Some of the mitigation strategies are to share data, which we were just discussing, and may or may not happen at scale. But another mitigation strategy is to aggregate a lot of real estate adjacent data, for example, sensor data, phone data, spending data, and so on. These will become increasingly more useful, in part because of the lack of real estate data. Another approach is to take a more what's sometimes called data-centric AI approach, which is the discipline of systematically engineering better small data sets. So basically, now that the algorithms are fairly robust, it's possible to hold the architectures of the algorithms fixed and then make gains by engineering better small data sets. And this is especially useful in real estate, which has comparatively small data sets. Another approach is to develop new algorithms. This is probably going to become increasingly necessary even in generative AI spheres. The generative AI has this different sort of issue. You do have a lot of data for these large models. The problem is that once you get to really hard questions, trying to differentiate within very specific classes, for example, you're going to need a lot more data, and that's a problem. So we'll have to come up with new, maybe machine learning approaches or statistical approaches. Some of the other challenges have to do with security risks, and this is probably a major concern, at least in enterprises. There are concerns about data leakage. For example, the data that you put into these models may be transmitted to unauthorized parties and so on. Having these large models increases the attack surface, and you could be at risk of hacks and scams and so on. But there are mitigation strategies. You can impose different protocols. You can have secure infrastructure. You can have make sure that you understand the integrations. You can have local models and so on. Alberto mentioned the hallucinations. There's a company called Vectera, which estimated that the hallucination rate for some of these large models can be anywhere from 3 to 27%. That's a huge problem. And there's not really much of a there's a lot of research going on, but it's not clear yet what the solution will be. One approach is to combine some of these models with, say, a retrieval augmented generation and so on, but these may not fully address the problem. Some reinforcement learning can help, but again, it's very hard to guarantee full accuracy. So the solution is you have to be very careful when you're implementing these. And there might be better models and data sets available. For example, ones that rely on symbolic or other reasoning models and trained on private data. Outdated data is another significant issue. Real estate, especially, is really slow and has a significant time lag. It's very hard to get up-to-date data in real estate, which again is why it's really important to use real estate adjacent data sets. These mobility data sets, for example, can provide a really clear insight into the performance of an asset. Some other more general problems have to do with improper behavior of the AI system or misalignment. So for example, the AI systems could mimic or maybe reinforce biases and stereotypes. Again, this has to do with the training set. So we could improve the training set and we can improve our reinforcement learning. When it comes to misalignment, some of these AI systems might just perform in unexpected ways. We've seen this already with some of the existing systems. The systems might have been trained and they might reward, or they may have misspecified reward functions. They might misbehave in certain unexpected ways. But the solution is to add safeguards and then make sure to encode the proper objectives. When it comes to the market level, which Matt was just discussing, there is potential for an increased volatility or system risk. And this has to do with how these AI systems operate. If you take a look at some of the high frequency trading issues that happened a few decades ago, these had to do with runaway algorithms. We could have similar sorts of issues with these new AI systems. Now, maybe there will be problems with speed and signal amplification with these sorts of algorithms. Also, a lot of these algorithms are trained on the past data, but there have not been a lot of examples of market crashes, which could make them more probable. Some of the mitigation strategies here are to add circuit breakers and safeguards and working harder to model volatility, ensuring that the training data actually include markers of volatility. This is related also to a lack of diversity of opinion. If everyone is using the same sorts of models with the same algorithms, then we could have basically a concentration toward a similar type of trading strategy or approach, and so on. The mitigation strategy here is to make sure that we're building and leveraging a diverse range of models. But this still doesn't get to the question of the data sets themselves. A lot of these data points are now being fed back into these AI systems, which means that a lot of the AI systems are going to be trained on lower quality data sets. And that's a problem because the performance will degrade, and we've already seen some of this happen. So we have to be very careful. We have to practice good data hygiene. We have to establish best data practices, and we have to keep track of what the good data are and what the junk data sets are. Inscrutability is probably one of.
Sorry, Tom, I was just going to support you there, and I was saying, I think at the heart of this and the big challenge for real estate in this space now is the veracity of the training sets. Because I do think, if you start building the pyramid at the wrong way at the bottom by the time you get to the top, and at the moment, I don't think we're there. I think we're rushing into perhaps applying the technology to quite often poor training sets. And I think that leads us to some very dark places pretty quickly. And I think the other big area where AI is going to have a massive impact is the ability to process and understand the behavioral heuristics involved in all of this. The human behavioral heuristics in property are massive. If you look at how participants behave in markets, and property is a very emotive thing in a lot of people. It's not just an asset, it's a very emotive part of culture. And the way people behave and fixate on how they trade and work and live require huge quantities of information, all based around how they behave. And it's those observational points around that that will give us the guidance as to where we're going to go with this. But there's a lot of base work to go there. I don't think just simply slapping technology on top of what we've got at the moment is going to take us anywhere new, particularly. I think what this is a wake-up call to say we need to start thinking far more about the fundamentals underneath this before we start applying this to draw conclusions.
I suppose building on that point, Matt, and I think a point that you might have made earlier, and perhaps get your thoughts, Alberto, is that I suppose in some respects, the wave of generative AI over the last 18 months, 2 years has sort of kind of woken the market up generally to kind of AI in all its forms, which in some ways is a good thing because it has, I think, made the sector perhaps more curious and more willing to explore the opportunities of using AI in all its flavors. But I suppose I'm answering the question here, but I guess I'm concerned that, as you say, really, but there's a danger of just using technology for technology's sake rather than doing a lot of foundational work in terms of getting data in the right form and also thinking about what problems are we trying to solve rather than just throwing tech at it. I mean, what's your sense, Alberto, about the way the market has reacted to this wave of generative AI and thus the interest in AI? Do you think they're doing the right things of stepping back and thinking, well, actually, there's a lot of housekeeping to do first here before we even start thinking about using AI? Are people doing the right thing? Are they thinking about the fundamentals?
Well, I think that companies, first of all, I mean, AI is about data, as we discussed. So first thing is companies needs to have the data themselves. I mean, the three of us here, I think we are data providers. So we provide the data to the companies, and we provide, I mean, at least my company provide data and provide AI tools, AI engines to analyze this data. But when it came to company themselves, they have to have, I mean, another way to adopt AI is a company might migrate their business into an AI-based type of platform or use AI within their own company. So to do that, they have to have their own data first. And I'm not sure that, I mean, of course, big companies, large companies, they have their own past data. But when we go into the middle companies, the large amount of companies, I don't think they have 20 years of data collected and stored somewhere. So when it comes to CBRE, JLL, these big investors, of course, we have everything, and they can use AI internally using their past data to predict, optimize, or automate. But when it comes to a small company or even a mid-sized company, not necessarily they have the whole data set of their own business, or maybe they have, but it's highly unstructured. So I think there is a challenge here because adoption in terms of providing AI as AI providers is one thing, and adoption can come through this route where there are third-party companies that provide data and AI engines, but there is also a route where the companies adopt AI internally without purchasing, a third-party product. So I don't know which route is going to be the actual development here because, purchasing from a third-party company has challenges, as Chlump mentioned before. There is data leakage and other security issues. So companies might prefer, to have some tech advisor to build their own thing. In fact, most of our customers, they also ask if we can apply our product to their own data. So I don't know which of the two route is going to be the future here, because third-party provider is something, but I think in real estate there is a information asymmetry, as we discussed, and probably the future maybe is going to be that companies want to build their own internal thing, and so there's not going to be any standardization at the end of the day.
I mean, Chlump, with your experience working with the market, I think as Alberto says, you're providing novel and very powerful and useful data sets to firms in the sector, but are you seeing them also doing their internal housekeeping? Are they doing this foundational work to look at their data set as well to make sure that they can effectively complement the data you're providing with a much better set of data internally?
Some of them are, at least the smarter ones are, or the ones that have the resources and capabilities. But that gets back to some of the structural challenges in the market. One is that there's a lot of these models are just inscrutable. People don't understand them, and they're wary about using anything that they don't understand. The other one has to do with just general inertia. There's a lack of very clear strategic vision. People do not yet have a clear AI strategy, so they're not sure how to make sense of AI or implement AI into their companies. And a lot of this also has to do with the capital investment. There's a significant investment required to implement these systems or properly internally, for example, getting everything in order and so on. But also, these companies have already made historical investments. They're not yet ready to scrap some of those systems. A really good example has to do with electricity. A lot of these companies, so for example, we had power stations and light bulbs and so on by the late 1800s, but electric motors had not taken over. People were still using steam, and that was because the companies had not reorganized their internal processes to take advantage of the new processes, the new systems. So these lessons apply also to the current AI revolution. So what we've been telling companies is that they have to imagine themselves as AI first, and that means adopting an AI first strategy. So developing corporate strategies with a view to implementing and leveraging AI, investing AI, viewing it as an industry-wide utility, building AI-focused foundations, as just discussed, for example, technical infrastructure, data warehouses, pipelines, analytics engines, and so on, and also organizational leaders and teams. Developing a really robust data strategy, again, foundational issue, but also learning how to integrate AI into everyday workflows, delegating tasks to AI, building AI feedback loops, and so on, and just experimenting with AI and partnering with AI experts. Another key principle for these companies is to formulate a strategic vision very early on. A lot of these companies are experimenting with point solutions without developing a much greater overarching unified strategy or understanding the greater purpose of the implementations. They have to start with the grand strategic vision first, and then identify the solution to the different problems that they may be having. Another one, obviously, is the data piece. There's no AI without data, and the data have to be robust. It's tempting to try to collect as much data as possible, but it's actually a mistake to accumulate data without understanding whether the data will be useful. Data hoarding is quite costly. So developing a proper AI strategy requires developing a robust data strategy. This means having the solid data foundations, as just mentioned, but also having mapping out the data requirements, building proper data structures, having very clear data policies, understanding data provenance, and establishing trust structures, and engaging in proper data lifecycle management, relying on trusted sources, and so on. The final piece is the data and AI literacy. These professionals need to understand what AI is and what data sets are, or what the data requirements are. They have to understand these well enough to maximize their value, and also to avoid being duped or exploited by failures. So this will require significant upskilling and building specialist teams.
Thanks, Matt. I mean, sorry, carry on, Matt. Yeah.
No, it's really interesting because, of course, in all of this, we're really in the foothills. And as with all new technologies, what we tend to do initially is try to use it to replace the current process. But of course, new technologies always beget new opportunities. If you use them, you talked about electricity there. If we took TV, early TV, they simply took vaudeville and stuck it on TV. Yeah. Then somebody invented the soap opera. Then somebody invented things. Suddenly, TV spun out into a whole different thing. The same is going to happen here, because it's only once we've got the data structured, once we can mine the data, that we're going to understand the power of what we've got. Now, the markets kind of understand this, and I would point to the fact that who's the biggest broker in the world? CBRE, their market cap's $26 billion. The next biggest is JLL, market cap $9 billion. What's the market cap of CoStar?
Bigger.
$35 billion. So where's the equity market valuing the transaction of property, or is it valuing the data, the latent data that it generates? And that tells you everything you need to know about where we see the future going on the values. The issue here would be we aren't going to see what this thing's going to create, because it's going to start creating a whole new and building what both the guys were saying. A lot of this is not just about applying it to what we do every day. It's beginning to analyze what we do as well. And I'll give you an example. Previously at my old job at Fidelity, we did have one very good system which we put in place where we had transactions that didn't work out the way we wanted them to. We kept, in all our decisioning processes, we had a written process which we followed, and we collected the data as we went through. And it was a, it was a yes/no process, and we got to the end and we went to investment committee and we made investments. Where it didn't work out, we were far more interested in deconstructing exactly what had happened in that process. And by storing that information, what we were able to do was identify whether we had a blind spot collectively as a group, or our process was flawed in how we were underwriting. And it was the latter case, and it was particularly to do with something where we discovered we were operating in Germany, and it was to do with the levels of assumptions we were putting into models around rental growth. And what we discovered was there was a cultural backlash in Germany to anything over 3%, because that was perceived as high inflation, and for historic reasons, German investors don't like high inflation. So we'd learned, and that became part of our process. And in a sense, what we're talking about now are tools that are going to allow us to do that at speed, not at, it took us 6 weeks to understand what the hell we were doing. And that changes, not just that, because I come back to the point, so much of this is going to be about understanding human behaviors in these processes. Because what we're seeing right now is a convergence of IT, colossal processing power, and human interaction. And those three things are very heady, but what you can create out of them is quite phenomenal. If as Chlump said, if you can get the processing, you can get your data and your processes right.
Indeed. Well, I'm conscious of time, so perhaps a wrap-up question for all three of you. And I guess in the absence of a highly engineered machine learning program that can answer this question, what do you think the next 2 to 5 years looks like in terms of AI and the real estate sector? Starting with you, Alberto.
Well, we need an AI to predict here.
Very good.
Well, I think it's hard to say. First of all, we never mentioned in all this, I think we mentioned before in our previous discussion, that there's a cost problem. That, of course, running these machines and storing data, it's a very expensive thing. So, again, I don't know if we are going to see major providers that they're going to standardize the data, and the market and the players will join this kind of mega intelligence in terms of real estate, which I don't think is likely, even though would be the best outcome. More likely, I think that companies will recognize slowly the engine and the advantages of AI, and they will start to implement internal solutions like migrating their own data, because I believe that the data asymmetry, information asymmetry, and leakage and security is very critical in real estate. And so I believe there would be an adoption, slow adoption, but mostly with internal tools rather than a platform that everybody.
Indeed. Your final thoughts on the future, Chlump?
Yeah, so a lot of the work that we're doing now will be AI driven. As mentioned, there will be maybe some more focus on these smaller models, smaller data sets, and data-centric AI. There's also quite a lot of excitement right now when it comes to agentic workflows, using AI agents, especially whole systems of AI agents to do a lot of this work. To solve a lot of the outstanding issues, maybe there will be a marriage of the more non-statistical or symbolic AI and reasoning AI with the now dominant statistical approaches. In terms of how real estate will change, a lot of the repetitive structured work, for example, the generation of reports and presentations, legal contract negotiations, and so on, will be automated. And then the competitive advantage will come from the algorithms and not the manual processes or the information living in people's heads. And equities, as Matt talks about quite a lot, provide an instructive example. Some estimates suggest that algo trading makes up about 70 to 80% of total volume. And in Forex, that number can be over 90%. Imagine a world in which real estate transactions are done algorithmically. The best deal makers will be the ones who have the best algorithms. In terms of how the rest of the world will change as a result, well, it will ultimately come down to how AI changes how we live and work. And these structural shifts will affect how we use, interact with, and ultimately value places and spaces. Data centers right now are obviously booming, but more generally in the future, there'll be infrastructure, water, and energy will become increasingly critical. But all of this presupposes that we have certain developments or innovations. Well, one is the solutions. And the first is solutions to these outstanding problems, for example, hallucinations or lack of data and so on. The other requirement is that we have more data generation and sharing. Costs will have to come down in order to make these systems much more, economically viable. AI and data literacy will have to improve as we go, and we'll need more data examples to create more sophisticated and specific models, and we'll need new approaches and algorithms.
Indeed, thanks. And Matt, before your last comments, it's interesting, isn't it, to reflect on the fact that actually AI will actually change the way we use real estate, because it's going to change the way we work and where we work. So I suppose ironically there's a bit of circularity there around AI, not only affecting the sector, but affecting the way we consume and use property.
Yeah, I mean, I think sure as eggs is eggs. The one thing that is going to be happening is there's going to be a lot of money misspent in this space. Okay, that's the one thing that we know is going to happen. People will all have huge budgets and all sorts of things, and we'll have probably third-party agents and groups who will emerge from this. I suspect the guys who will really benefit are the people who already have a big footprint in the sectors that they're operating in and are able to harvest that data. A lot of this is obviously comes back, we're presupposing we're going to get continued growth in the processing power. On your point, the impact, I suspect, from the property perspective is that there's going to be a disproportionately big impact on professional classes, actually. And I think that's going to be one of the issues. And I think it'll hit property hard because of the artisanal way that people tend to concentrate all of the information into one or two people, whereas in any efficient process, you're deconstructing and sharing information. So I think there's going to be quite a lot of big impacts, but that's not just property, that's across the financial markets. I think the other thing at a practical level is that you're going to start seeing data and data assets appear on balance sheets as items. You know, you have goodwill with retailers. The ability for you to understand your client base and your own business will become an asset in itself, because, you know, in the end, everything's about information. I think the area where we're going to have a big collision is going to come from academia, and that's through the behavioral scientists and the psychology people, and that's already underway. But I think we're only scratching the surface on that in terms of understanding how human behaviors impact all of this stuff. And the fact that for years and years, you know, we'd all been there with our rational economic models, only to discover that human beings are about the least rational things on the planet when you watch what they actually do versus what they say they're going to do. And touching on something that Alberto and some both talked on, I think the big one here in financial markets generally, and property I put into this bucket with it, I don't necessarily see us scraping out all of the processes to an automated real estate market at the transaction point. Where this is really going to start impacting us is in the asset allocation modeling and the asset allocation tools. They are already automated. If you look at the shift to passive investment in the equity and debt markets, the main reason they cannot use real estate data right now is because of the poor standard of the data and the non-standardization. If we begin to solve some of those problems, real estate can start, you know, real estate investment opportunities as a sector can begin to present data to the algorithms that can be processed and included, at that point, we open the door to a far more liquid and deep market in terms of capital. And that really is the biggest challenge for our industry. We have grown up since when I started, it was a local domestic industry. We now have a globalized financial market at the top end. And if we really want to stay and play in that space, this is actually going to be one of the key tools that will get us there.
Indeed. Well, it's been a fascinating hour, and we could obviously talk for much longer, but for today, Matt, Alberto, Chlump, thanks so much for your time. It's been fascinating.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Good to see you all.